I spent 100 days in Terraria's Calamity Mod, and here's how it went. Calamity is a mod that adds thousands of new items, dozens of new bosses, and one of the best soundtracks in gaming history to Terraria. It also adds new modes such as Revengeance, Death, and Malice, and each of the modes increase the difficulty of the game even more. However, for the sake of myself and my mental sanity, I'm not going to be playing Death mode or Malice. I'm just going to be focusing on Revengeance. I didn't really use any other major mods other than Calamity. I just used some quality of life mods that wouldn't really affect the gameplay too much. I did, however, use a texture pack, which might seem weird at first, but it grows on you quick. My goal in this playthrough is to beat all of the bosses Calamity adds. However, my goal in this video is to beat Calamitous by the time I reach 100 days. Full disclosure, this is my second attempt at this challenge because I recorded the first attempt in the wrong format. Also, halfway through this video, Calamity got ported over to 1.4, so just so you know. Anyways, this video is really long, so grab a snack and a drink and just sit down and relax. Before I started though, I quickly spun a wheel to figure out what class I was going to go with for Pre Hardmode, and I got Melee. Day 1, I spawned in, opened my treasure bag, activated Revengeance, chopped some trees, and then built some quick shelter. My goal at this point was to find some ropes so I could build up to the new plant twice that Calamity adds. Then I traveled to the right, and I found a snow biome, and in it I encountered my first Calamity enemy, the wolf from Throne. Not too long after I encountered another wolf from enemy, and it one-shot me.
Back to the lobby.
Then when I respawned, I crafted some boreal wood armor, and low-key, it looks sick. I mean, just look at it. After dying in the snow biome again, I decided to travel to the left this time, and I found a sinkhole in the desert. I tried exploring it, but I wasn't prepared enough. After nearly shitting myself, I went back home. By the time I got home, it was already nighttime, so I started building up to the sky. Once I reached the planetoids, I mined the ore in it using Vein Miner, and just listen to this. Using the silver I got from the planetoid, I crafted some silver armor. Then in the sky I found another planetoid full of lead, and this is basically my ear looking SMR. Then I found this thing called a Radon Zab, and above it was a smaller planetoid, which had a life crystal inside it, which was surrounded by 39 diamonds. Then inside the Radon Zab, I found some lore items and items to craft new armors and weapons, which will be really important later on. Back home, I was looking at crafting recipes with the guide, and I saw this weapon called the Yativio Bloom, which was classified as a melee weapon. So I decided to look for its crafting materials, and then while I was looking for a jungle, I found not 1, not 2, not 3, but 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, but 12 fallen stars. When I reached the end of the world, I found the Sulphurous Sea, one of the new biomes that Calamity adds. But I was too focused on the scenery to notice that my health was being drained. Then after traveling through 2 crimson biomes and 1 chonky slime, I finally reached the jungle. And in the jungle, I found a granite biome, and in the granite biome, I found a granite chest, and in the granite chest, I found some Hermes boots and a suspicious looking guy. Then while I was crossing the desert, I found a mini boss called the Snidrion? Canidrion? Whatever. Despite my best efforts at dodging his attacks, I still ended up dying. The rest of day 3 was spent looking for crafting materials for the Yativio Bloom. By day 4 I had all the materials, so I crafted the Yativio Bloom. At first I was kinda disappointed to find out that it was a flail, but it turned into a spear once you right clicked. And not only that, but it also inflicted heavy poison damage once it hit enemies. Then in the sky, I found loads of the smaller planetoids, and I found a bunch of life crystals this way. Then I started working on the magic storage system, which is a mod that allows me to store all of my items in one space. Then I explored the skies a bit more to find more life crystals, and then I headed to the desert so I could find crafting materials for the desert medallion. Under the desert, I found the Sunken Sea, which is also one of the new biomes that Calamity adds, but I chose not to explore it yet. I then farmed a bit more so I could craft a desert medallion, which I would use to spawn our first Calamity boss, the Desert Scourge. Then back at the desert, I started working on an arena. And then it was finally time to summon our first boss, the Desert Scourge. At this point the fight was going pretty well, although I was having a lot of trouble dodging the smaller scourges, but once I took care of them I only had to deal with the big one. But the Desert Scourge's speed increases as it takes damage, so I was still having a lot of difficulty dodging its attacks. And that's the fight. Honestly, it was a lot of fun and I can't believe I beat it first try. But still, I wanted to try fighting it again, but the sandstorm happened and I didn't want to fight it in a sandstorm, so I just started preparing for the King Slime fight. Then using the drops from the Desert Scourge, I crafted a bunch of Victide bars, which I then used to craft a Red Tide sword, which is kind of like the enchanted sword, but instead of firing beams it fires whirlpools. At this point I also noticed that in my inventory I had an item called the Desert Scourge, which had a bunch of lore for that Desert Scourge, and I'll put it on the screen just in case you're interested and want to read it. Then I spent the rest of day 7 mining for rubies, and just when I finally thought I found some, turns out it was amethyst. Then in the corner of my screen I saw 2 gem deposits. The first one didn't have any rubies, so I kind of got scared, but the second one I got lucky and I found a bunch of rubies. Then I crafted the King Slime spawner, and it was finally time to fight King Slime. The fight was going pretty much like a normal King Slime fight until I got it down to half health, and that gem in its crown came flying out and started shooting beams at me. But they were pretty easy to dodge because of my Hermes boots, so it wasn't really too much of a problem. And that was the fight. Honestly, not much to say about it. I came close to dying a couple of times, but other than that, it wasn't too challenging. Also, here's the lore for the King Slime, just in case you're interested. Just like last time, you can pause to read it if you want. Then I spent the rest of day 8 preparing for the Eye of Cthulhu. I fought the Desert Scourge again so that I could craft the Victide armor set. However, I didn't have enough material to craft the full set, so I had to fight the Desert Scourge again. After I had the full armor set, I started making an arena so I could fight the Eye of Cthulhu. While I waited for it to be nighttime again, I decided to remodel my base so it didn't look like this. Honestly, I kinda got lost in the building process and I didn't realize it was nighttime, but as soon as I realized, I spawned in the eye. The start of the fight was going pretty good until I got it down to not even a third of its health, and it transformed into its second phase already. And then around half health, it started dashing at me horizontally, which really caught me by surprise. This was a new phase that Revengeance adds. Instead of dashing vertically like it normally does in Revengeance, the eye aligns itself with the player and then dashes towards them. And I beat it first try. Honestly, just like the King Slime, not much to say about it. So here's the lore item. I didn't really gain anything important from the treasure bag though, other than the shield and this new thing called the Death Stare Rod, which summoned an eye that stares into the deepest corners of your soul and makes you recollect all of the sins from your past. Then I spent the rest of day 9 and day 10 finishing my base. Afterwards, I fought King Slime again so I could get its mount. Then when I was looking at the boss checklist mod to figure out what boss I needed to fight next, I saw the giant clam on it, which is a mini boss that spawns in the sunken sea, so I decided to head there in order to fight it. Shortly after reaching it, I could already see the boss cursor pointing towards the giant clam, and then after mining a bit, I saw it in the corner of my screen, just chilling. In the sunken sea, all of the mobs are passive until you attack them, so I decided to use this as an opportunity to make an arena. Once I cleared out an area big enough for the fight, I attacked the clam, which caused the fight to start. The Clam's main way to deal damage in this fight was to teleport above the player and then slam down on them. It wasn't really too much of a problem trying to deal with this since I could just dash out of the way. Then when I finally killed the Clam, an NPC dropped out called Amidius. Amidius is basically Calamity's version of a guide since he helps the player figure out how to progress in Calamity. I bought the Amidius' trident from him, which is a spear that shoots whirlpools that home in on enemies. After I went back home, I was looking at crafting recipes using the items I got from the Sunken Sea, and I saw this weapon called the Seashine Sword. So I headed back to the Sunken Sea in order to collect its materials. After I crafted the Seashine Sword, it turned out to be a better version of the enchanted sword since the projectiles were bigger and it dealt more base damage. Day 12 was pretty much spent with me working on my elevator and looking for a glowing mushroom biome so I could fight my next Calamity boss. And then I headed to a glowing mushroom planetoid I found earlier so I could get some glowing mushrooms to craft a spawner for my next boss. But while I was heading towards the Crimson Altar, I got a message that the Blood Moon was happening. So after I crafted the Deca Podita Sprout, I headed back home. I then blocked all of my doors, and then I just used my Amidius' trident to kill off all the enemies. Then I went back to the glowing mushroom biome and started making an arena so I could find my next boss. Next to the glowing mushroom biome, I found a Sunken Sea themed Draydon lab, and just like the space Draydon lab, I also found some lore items and some other Draydon themed items that will be important later on. Then I used the Decapodia Sprout to summon the next boss, Crabulon. As you can probably tell from the name, Crabulon is a big crab and you're probably wondering where it is. For some reason, Crabulon spawned way up above the arena, and because of that, while I waited for it to drop down, my adrenaline meter filled up, and just look at this. And that's it. Yeah, so the fight was over pretty quickly, which is really surprising because like I said in the intro, this is my second 100 days attempt, and in my last attempt I ended up dying to this boss a total of 9 times before I beat it. Anyway, here's the lore item. When I was looking at the boss logs, I noticed that I could open up the logs that I found in the Draydon lab, and it had some cool lore in it. Then I headed to the Crimson and made an arena so I could fight the Brain of Cthulhu. The fight was just as you'd expect. Once you take care of the creepers, the brain transforms into its second phase and starts teleporting. But the new Revengeance phase was also really interesting because the brain also starts dashing at you just like the eye. Yeah, that was the Brain of Cthulhu fight. The end got a little bit hectic, but I love the new dashing mechanic. The Brain also dropped 2 lore items this time, so if you don't have a life like me, you can pause and read it if you want. Then using the drops from the Brain, I crafted this item called the Old Cassette, which gave me some after images, so that's kinda cool. Then I went back to the Crimson to create another arena to fight the next boss, the Perforators. In order to spawn them, you need to find and destroy a Perforator cyst, which spawns randomly in the Crimson biome. As soon as I found and destroyed one, the Perforator hive spawned. I got through the first 2 phases, but then when I got it to less than half health, it killed me. Then I bought a worm scarf from the Dryad because you can in Calamity, and I also put some heart lanterns down and spawned the Perforators again, and I died again. I tried one more attempt at the boss, but once I died again, I decided to head to hell to upgrade my gear a bit. And while I was down there, I killed this demon, which dropped a weapon called the Blade Crest Oath Sword. The sword fired sights, which inflicted the on fire debuff. Then once I got all of my potions ready, I headed to the Crimson again so I could try my 4th attempt at the boss. But once I reached the Crimson, I got a message that the Goblin army was approaching and that there was a toxic downpour, which means that there's an event happening at the Sulphurous Sea. Then I headed back home, and just like the Blood Boon, I blocked all my doors, and then I just used my immediate assist trident to clear out all the enemies. Once I took care of the Goblin army, I quickly made my way towards the Sulphurous Sea so I could get the Acidic Rain event over with as quick as possible. The Acid Rain event is important because it allows you to access the Abyss, a whole new biome beneath the Sunken Sea, but we're nowhere near strong enough to take it on yet. Then I went back to the Crimson and tried another attempt at the boss, and it was going pretty well. I took out the first two perforators pretty easily, and once I got it to its last phase, I actually beat it, or so I thought, because in order to beat this boss, you have to take out all three of the perforators that it spawns, and then the hive. Once I found another cyst, I potioned up, and the fight started. This fight was definitely the hardest fight yet, but it was still so much fun. It didn't drop anything noteworthy, but it did spawn a new ore into the world. The ground is glittering with light. This means that aerolite has been added into the world. And here's the lore item. Then I quickly crafted some Crimson armor, and I grabbed my potions and I started looking for aerolite. And I found a lot of aerolite. Then using the aerolite and some hellstone, I crafted the sword called the Broken Biome Blade, and it is so cool. But before that, I also crafted aerolite armor and a wind blade which shot cyclones. The biome blade, like its name suggests, works differently per biome. You can attune a biome to the blade, and it depends on the attunement how the blade works. You can also switch between two attunements that you have saved on the blade by right clicking. Then I headed to the jungle in order to prepare to fight the queen bee, and I found a hive and made an arena, but it didn't prove to be any worse since I got decimated. I then decided to craft the queen bee spawner and fight it on the surface, just because I didn't want to find another hive. However, this attempt ended up being even worse than my last attempt. Also, one thing I forgot to mention is that in Calamity, NPCs sell you potions, which really speeds up the progression of the game. Not only that, but the boss spawners are also non-consumable, which means that you only have to craft one spawner, which can be used an infinite amount of times. I upgraded my jungle arena and then tried another attempt at the queen bee, and this time I got really close, but I still ended up losing. Then I decided to try one final attempt at the queen bee, and here's how it went. And would you look at that? I won! Honestly, once my adrenaline meter filled up, I pretty much knew it was over. After the fight, I looked up what the new queen bee phase was, and turns out that there is no new phase. Instead, when the queen bee is on the surface, it enrages. So I kind of dug my own grave there. And just like before, here's the lore item. Then I spent the rest of day 19 and a bit of day 20 making more houses so more NPCs could move in. Once I finished building the housing, I had the witch doctor move in, who sold some really good potions. Then I went to the dungeon and made an arena in order to fight Skeletron. Then once I finished my arena, I talked to the old man and spawned in Skeletron. At this point you probably already know the drill. The fight was going pretty much like a normal Skeletron fight. I focused on the hands, and once I took them out, all I had to do was focus on the head. But then Skeletron started shooting skulls at me and started teleporting. And just when I thought I was finally starting to get the hang of it, boom, Skeletron respawned his hands. And I defeated Skeletron. I came close to dying at the end, but I killed Skeletron just before it could kill me. Anyway, here's the lore item, and this one's actually really interesting. Then because of the bones from Skeletron, I could now craft the Skyline wings. Also, now that I had defeated Skeletron, I could access the dungeon. So I headed to the dungeon to look for more equipment and the Goblin Tinkerer. Right after I entered the dungeon, I found the mechanic. And not too long after, I also found the Goblin Tinkerer. I took this opportunity to quickly reforge my Biome Blade and my Wind Blade. Also enjoy this time lapse of me looking for a Shadow Key. After I came back home, I quickly upgraded my equipment. I got some lightning boots and an obsidian shield. Then I went to the Crimson and crafted an overloaded sludge, which is a spawner for our next boss, the Slime Gods. Then I bought this accessory called the Counter Scarf from the Clothier. This accessory works like the Shield of Cthulhu, except by dashing into projectiles or enemies, you can dodge them. Now I was fully prepared to take on the Slime Gods. The Slime Gods are made up of 3 parts, the Crimulant Slime, the Ebonian Slime, and the Core, and each of them inflict a different debuff after hitting the player. The Crimulant one inflicts darkness, the Ebonian one inflicts weakness, and the Core inflicts both of those and the distorted debuff, which makes the player float and limits their mobility. This was definitely the most fun fight and my favorite so far. In terms of drops, the Slime Gods dropped this item called Electrolyte Gel Pack, which increased the damage when Adrenaline is active by 15% and the damage reduction by 5%. They also dropped Purified Gel, which will be important in just a second. The Slime Gods were such a cool boss, but their lore is even cooler. While I was looking at crafting recipes using the Purified Gel, I saw this sword called the Fractured Arc, which seemed really interesting, so I decided to craft it. It required a Star Fury and an enchanted sword, but I didn't have an enchanted sword. So let me take this moment and quickly mention that Calamity adds tons of new vanilla recipes that really help the progression in the game and reduce grinding a lot. For example, since I didn't have an enchanted sword, I just crafted one. After I crafted the sword, I decided to reforge it, and this is when I realized that for some reason, the reforges in Calamity followed a pattern. I couldn't get a legendary modifier no matter how many times I tried, so I just decided to keep the godly modifier. After I was done reforging, I wanted to try it out, and I found the perfect thing for me to try out the parry mechanic on. By right clicking, you can do this thing, which is a thrust that if it connects with an enemy, it does a parry. The parry powers the sword up by extending its range, increasing its damage, and causing it to shoot projectiles for 10 seconds. Then I crafted this crafting station called the Static Refiner, which I needed to craft my next armor set. I also needed Hellstone, so I quickly headed to Hell and got a bunch. After I had my materials ready, I crafted the Static Gel armor set. I wanted to try my new weapon and my new armor set out, so I decided to try and fight the Slime Gods again. And I lost horribly. So with my fractured ego, get it? Fractured character arc. Okay. I fought them again and I beat them very easily this time. I also crafted the sword called a Gelatic Blade, which shot a wave of gel that went through walls. Then in hell I started working on a platform so I could fight the wall of flesh. Then while I was working on the platform, I killed this voodoo demon and it spawned the wall. So I tried fighting it, and to be fair I got pretty far, but I got stuck and ended up dying. Then I tried fighting the wall of flesh, and just like the first attempt, it didn't go so well. However, I noticed that it hadn't crossed the underworld yet, so I tried to catch up to it. And I did. But...
What is this?
When I was back working on my arena, I found a health themed spray-on lab. And in the chests in the lab, I found a sword called Murasama. Although I couldn't use it because apparently you have to be worthy to use it. Then finally on day 25, I spawned in the wall of flesh, and this fight was really interesting. Yeah, and that was the fight. As soon as I got adrenaline and I combined it with a parry, the fight was pretty much over, because I took off more than half of its health in just a couple of seconds. Now that we've beaten the wall of flesh, we're officially no longer in Pre Hardmode. And we finally made it to Hardmode. But before that, just like the brain, the wall also dropped 2 lore items, so you can pause and read it if you want. Then just like pre-hard mode, I spun a wheel to figure out what class I was going to go with for hard mode, but this time I got the mage class. Since now I was the mage class, I decided to craft a strategical cap, which was the mage helmet of my armor. Then I went through all my magic weapons and I picked out the Abyssal Tomb, which seemed like the best magic weapon I had on me at the time. When I beat the wall, I got some messages alongside the regular ones. The sunken sea trembles, your world has been blessed with cobalt and palladium, and a star has fallen from the heavens. The sunken sea trembles pretty much just means that all of the enemies in the sunken sea are now buffed. A star has fallen from the heavens means that there's a new biome in the world, which we will explore in just a second. But the most interesting one was that your world has been blessed with cobalt and palladium, because in Calamity you don't spawn hard mode ore by breaking the altars, but rather by beating the mechanical bosses. Now, to be honest with you guys, I've never played the mage class before, so I wasn't too familiar with it. So I decided to go look at the Calamity Wiki's guide on mage to help me figure out what weapons I should get, and I chose to get the Frigid Flashbolt and the Crystal Serpent. But before that, I decided to look for cobalt and palladium so I could get some better armor. And while I was looking for cobalt, I found a cavern version of our Draydon lab, and inside it was a material called Suspicious Scrap, which will be really important for this playthrough. It's used to create a magic weapon called the SHPC. And just by looking at it, you can tell that it's going to be busted. A little bit next to the first lab, I actually found a second lab. This meant that I now had 2 suspicious scraps, and I needed 4 to craft the SHPC. Then after a bit more mining, I headed home and crafted the Frost Bolt and the Flare Bolt. Now all I needed was some Essence of Allium that's dropped by ice enemies and Essence of Chaos that's dropped by enemies in the Brimstone Crag. I then crafted some cobalt armor and then I headed to hell, so I could get to the Brimstone Crag, a new biome that Calamity adds at the edge of hell. The enemies here dropped Essence of Chaos, which I needed. Once I had enough essences, I went back home and I crafted the Frigid Flashbolt. The Frigid Flash fires balls that bounce off of walls, have piercing effects, and inflict on fire and frostburn at the same time. After getting some fishing equipment, I headed to the Hallow in order to get the Crystal Serpent. And after all of day 27 and half of day 28, I finally got the Crystal Serpent. At home, I had a traveling merchant who sold me a DPS meter and a life form analyzer, which paired with a hunter potion allowed me to find the wizard pretty quickly. The wizard sold mana potions that were necessary for this playthrough. Then I headed to the snow biome and started working on an arena to fight our first hard mode boss, Cryogen. Due to my experience from my last playthrough, I knew how sensitive Cryogen was to biome changes, since leaving the snow biome causes it to enrage, so I had to make sure that Cryogen always stayed in the snow biome. After I finished the arena, I started farming ice enemies to get the essence of Allium. Then I headed to the underground halo to farm some Soul of Lights. Then when I was crossing the dungeon, I found the astral biome. It's a space-themed biome with a tree in the center which is surrounded by astral ore, which I wasn't capable enough to mine yet, but for the rest of day 29, I did try farming the enemies to see if they dropped anything important. And just when I forgot to record, an enemy dropped a weapon called the Glorious End, which spawned a star that I can ride. It can also be used to ram into enemies, causing an explosion which damages both the player and the enemy. Then when I was looking for Souls of Night, I found an ice-themed trade-on lab, and inside it I found a log which gave us some really interesting backstory for our next boss. Then I farmed a bit more for Soul of Nights. And after I had enough Soul of Nights, I could finally craft a Cryo Key. Then on day 31, I headed to the snow biome, and it was finally time to fight Cryogen. Cryogen is an interesting boss because it spawns with a shield that you have to break before you can actually deal damage. This paired with the fact that it regenerates its shield in like 10 seconds makes this boss pretty tedious. And that was Corrosion, the first hard mode boss. Just like the giant clan, killing Corrosion caused the Archmage NPC to be released, and he sold some really good mage items. But I only bought the Icicle Trident and the Permafrost Concoction, which basically buffed my magic damage and gave me a second chance once I lost all of my health. Corrosion's lore item actually adds on to the lore item we found in the Ice Trade-on lab. Killing Corrosion caused the cryonic ore to spawn into the world, although we couldn't mine it because you need at least an adamantite or titanium pickaxe to mine it. In terms of drops, Corrosion did drop a mage weapon, but it was kind of lame. Although it did drop some nice wings that dropped icicles when flying. I then reforged all of my items, and I noticed that I could craft a mechanical worm. So I did, because I thought that my piercing weapons would do really good against it. While I waited for nighttime, I decided to go to the sunken sea and see how strong the enemies were. And there I found a giant clam, except this time it was buffed, and it really caught me off guard. Then I decided to work on collecting materials for other spawners. After I crafted the mechanical eye, I started collecting materials for the seafood, which spawns the aquatic scourge. But I needed a lot of shark fins and I was having trouble finding them, but I noticed that a lot of abyss enemies dropped them, so that was my next goal. But night came before that, so I decided to fight the destroyer. This fight was very different, because in Revengeance, the Destroyer had a whole new AI. Instead of using the Worm AI like it usually does, in Revengeance it used the Wyvern AI, which caused it to follow the player more accurately by doing sharper turns, and actually kind of flying in a sense. Beating the Destroyer caused Mithril and Orichalcum to spawn into the world, which gave me access to a whole bunch of new weapons because now I could craft the Mithril Anvil. Then at home I started setting up my Draydon station so I could craft the items that I needed. And before I forget, here's the lore item. And this one's a long one. Once I finished setting up my sweatshop, I had to wait for the power cell factories to make Draydon cells. In the meantime, I decided to make some equipment so I could travel the Abyss. Then I had to decrypt this thing called a schematic so I could unlock new recipes to create new items, but that would take a while. So on day 34, I headed to the Abyss. The Abyss, as you'd guess, was a very dark biome in which most of the enemies were based on fish that actually exist in the lower depths of the sea. In the Abyss, there was also an ore called Scoria ore that dropped fire on the player, but we need at least a pig saw to mine it. The Abyss has 4 tiers. As their tiers increase, so does the difficulty in enemies. I was only able to reach the 2nd tier before I ran out of breath. Since I only needed one more shark fin, I went to the regular ocean this time, and there I found a mechanical skull. And also this enemy called question mark. And when I killed it, it turned into a boss called Anahita, and she was really strong. When I was mining for mithril in the jungle, I found a Plantera bulb, which I guess Calamity changed because in vanilla, it only spawns after beating all of the mechanical bosses. I also found a whole bunch of life fruits, and I thought it was a glitch, so I decided not to use them until I beat all of the mechanical bosses. But while I'm editing this video, I looked it up, and apparently life fruits spawn after beating at least one mechanical boss, so that was kind of stupid on my part. After creating the mithril anvil, I crafted some orichalcum armor. After doing a bit more mining, I found a jungle temple with a chest outside the temple, and the chest had a solar tablet. And curiosity got the better of me. This was a huge mistake, because not only did most of my NPCs die, but the enemies didn't drop anything important, except a bat wing. Other than that, this was a huge waste of time. Once the eclipse was finally over, I headed to the sky to farm some essence of Ellium and to get some solar flights in order to make bat wings. After farming for a while, I noticed that in my inventory I had a weapon called Skyglaze, which I could upgrade into a weapon called the Wyvern's Call. After I crafted the bat wings, I went to the sky to find more souls so I could craft the Wyvern's Call. This weapon made feathers drop from the sky towards the cursor, and occasionally wyverns. After that, I saw that the Jelly Priestess NPC sold some really cheap blocks, and one of those blocks was laboratory plating, which I could turn into platforms, so that was an easy way to make an arena. Then I headed to the Sulphurous Sea to make an arena. And while I was there, I killed this enemy called the Thrasher, and it dropped the Angler, and somehow I hadn't found the Angler yet, so that was kinda cool. Then on day 37, I crafted the seafood and spawned in the Aquatic Scourge. The Aquatic Scourge is definitely one of my favorite bosses. I don't know why, but it just feels so majestic. Anyway, here's the lore item. After I beat the Aquatic Scourge, I had another Acid Rain event happen, except it was in tier 2 this time, because the Acid Rain also has tiers that increase in difficulty as you progress through the game. In the middle of the event, I actually had the Kragmaw Meyer mini-boss spawn, and he Kamehameha'd my ass. Then after I finished the event, I fought the Aquatic Scourge a couple more times so I could get the Downpour magic weapon. After I got the staff, I headed back home and expanded my arena. Then on day 38, I tried my first attempt at the twins. And I got really close. So on day 39, I added heart lanterns and star in the bottles to my arena. Then while I waited for nighttime, I was looking at recipes and I saw this item called a Charred Idol, which was the spawning item for the Brimstone Elemental, and it required this item called the Unholy Core. An Unholy Core was made by combining Charred Ore and Hellstone, and I found out that Charred Ore was an ore that spawned in the Brimstone Crag, so I headed there in order to mine it. And while I was there, I killed this enemy called the Cultist Assassin, and it dropped some really cool vanity items. After I got enough, I crafted a bunch of unholy core and I used it to craft the Brimrose staff and the Burning Sea. The Brimrose staff fired a beam that was kind of in the shape of a flower. The Burning Sea fired balls that upon coming in contact with water turned into smaller homing balls. After I reforged my items, I tried another attempt at the twins, but just like last time I got really close but died. Then on day 40 I wanted to craft the Fab Souls vodka, which would allow the Drunken Princess NPC to move in, but it required the unicorn's horn and I spent all of day 40 looking for a unicorn, but I just couldn't find one for some reason. But night came before I could find a single unicorn, so it was time to try my third attempt at the twins. Honestly, in my unprofessional opinion, the twins are so much better in Calamity, because they're no longer a close range plus long range duo like in vanilla. Instead, they have an arsenal of attacks which allows them to focus on being either close or long range, but it doesn't limit them to just either one. Then using the Souls of Sight and the information from the schematic, I crafted the Gauss pistol. And I also crafted the Axe of Purity, which basically spreads out purification powder when you right click. Since now I had adamantite and titanium in my world, I went mining for them. And I also went looking for more Drayron labs, so I could have the items I needed for the SHPC. After I found another Drayron lab, I had all the materials I needed to craft the SHPC, and I crafted it. The SHPC fired these energy balls that did area damage when you left clicked and fired really loud lasers when you right clicked. Then I crafted an adamantite pickaxe and went mining for cryonic ore, which spawns in the underground snow biome. And while I was looking for more ore, I accidentally broke a perforator cyst, and this is when I truly realized how broken the SHPC was. Then after I finished mining, I crafted a bunch of cryonic bars and I crafted some starlight wings. And after that, I also crafted some Daedalus armor. Then on day 43, I crafted the charred idol and headed to the Brimstone Crag once more to create an arena. Then after I finished my arena, I used the charred idol and out came the lava waifu. The Brimstone Elemental is definitely one of the hardest bosses in Calamity, but luckily, I knew how to dodge her attacks since I struggled with her a lot before this attempt. I think I'm starting to notice a pattern with the long lore items. The Brimstone Elemental also dropped this weapon called the Seething Discharge, which shot these flames that went through walls. Then right after that, I went home and it was almost nighttime, so I decided to try an attempt at Skeletron Prime. And here's how that went. and I beat Skeletron first try. Killing Skeletron caused hallowed ore to spawn in the hallowed biome because mechanical bosses don't drop hallowed bars in Calamity, which is kind of cool because it makes the progression more linear. And then I upgraded my shoes into the Angel Treads, which required all of the mechanical boss's souls to craft. Then I went mining so I could collect items to craft the Ornate Shield and the Celestial Magnet. After I crafted the Ornate Shield, I had a traveling merchant arrive who actually sold me the Celestial Magnet, so that saved me some time. And I combined it with an Avenger emblem to turn it into the Celestial Emblem. Then for the rest of day 44, I went to the Hallow to mine for hallowed ore. And while I was mining, I ran into the Earth Elemental, which is a mini-boss that spawns underground. And it dropped some cool looking vanity items. Then on day 45, after I was finished mining, I went home and crafted the Sky Fracture, which I then upgraded into the Infernal Rift. I then started working on getting the items for the Ankh Shield. I crafted all of the items necessary for it since you don't need to farm for them in Calamity. Then I crafted the Ankh Shield. And I also crafted the Eye of Desolation because I thought I was prepared enough to try my first attempt at Calamitous. And to be fair, I was kind of prepared since I got decently far. On day 46, I headed to the jungle to look for Chlorophyte so I could get some Chlorophyte armor. After I crafted the Chlorophyte armor, I used all of my life fruits that I had saved up, and I also crafted the Valkyrie Ray. And I tried my second attempt at Calamitous. And I got so close. So on day 47, I thought, hey, maybe I can beat Plantera first. So I started making an arena. And for some reason, mobs just wouldn't stop spawning. So after a whole painful day of building an arena, I broke the Plantera bulb. Once I spawned Plantera, I couldn't even get a quarter of its health down before dying. On day 48, I went looking for a unicorn again so that the drunken princess would move in, because she sold some candles that gave the player some insane buffs. I also found a unicorn pretty easily this time. But while I waited for the drunken princess to move in, it was already nighttime, so I decided to try another attempt at Calamitous. And here's what happened. Calamitous has 5 phases. The first phase where it just fires fireballs at you, the second phase the bullet hell phase, the third phase where it spawns Cataclysm and Catastrophe, which are pretty much the nerfed version of the twins. The fourth phase is once again the bullet hell phase except tougher this time. And the fifth and final phase where it just starts dashing at you and does a lot more damage. Honestly, I take back what I said about the slime gods. This boss is by far my favorite so far, and I don't see this changing anytime soon. The music is also my favorite yet. The reason this fight is so long is because I just wanted to fit as much of the music in as I could. This fight makes me even more excited for the Supreme Calamitous fight, which is supposed to be the perfect version of this fight because this wasn't actually Calamitous, it was the Calamitous clone. Supreme Calamitous is actually the final boss of Calamity. Since this is the point where I got to in my last playthrough, the rest of this mod is mostly unknown to me, so from here on out I'm going into this mod as blind as some of you watching this video. Calamitous dropped this item called Ashes of Calamity, which when combined with Unholy Core allowed me to craft the Brimflame armor. However, I didn't have enough materials to craft a full set. Calamitous also dropped a spell tomb called the Lashes of Chaos, which pierced enemies and inflicted the Brimstone Flames debuff. When I beat Calamitous, I got a message that the ocean depths are trembling, which I assumed meant the Abyss, so I went to the Abyss. In the Abyss, when I killed enemies, they dropped new materials called Luminal and Depth Cells. And also this new block called Tenebris or Tenebris started spawning. Then I went into the third layer of the Abyss. I actually found the Reaper Shark mini boss, and I didn't stand a chance. Then while I was looking at the recipes using Luminal, I saw this weapon called the Undyne's Retribution, and I crafted it. It shot these harpoons that kind of followed the cursor and homed in on enemies. Then I reforged it to the mythical modifier. Then on day 50, Calamity got ported over to the 1.4 version, so I spent all of day 50 transferring all of my items to a chest since it wouldn't transfer using the magic storage system. And once I finished transferring my items, I updated Calamity to 1.4.
Man, I'm dead.
Now that Calamity is in 1.4, this means that you can play Calamity in Master Mode. So if this video gets 100 likes, once this playthrough is over, I'll do a Master Mode plus Death Mode playthrough. The first thing I noticed in 1.4 was that a bunch of items got removed. This is because the developers wanted less item bloat, so they removed a bunch of unnecessary items. Another thing I noticed when I was moving my items was that the Victide armor set got a new sprite, and honestly, I love it. Then on day 51, once I finished transferring all of my items, the first thing I did was fight the Torch God, because luck is an important thing in 1.4. Once I finished the fight, I got the Torch God's favor, which basically automatically turns your torch into the torch of the biome you place it in. If you place the right torch in the right biome in 1.4, your luck increases, which basically means that you get better drops and stuff. Now that I had reached my goal, I decided to remodel my entire base so it didn't look so bland. I wanted to go with an aquatic theme, kind of like the Sunken Sea. So I spent the next 10-ish days working on my base. I also fought Calamitous again in the middle of it so I could finish crafting the Brimflame armor set. Honestly, I was kind of liking the way it was coming out until I started putting the walls in. The walls ruined the aesthetic in my opinion. Anyways, I decided to make the houses for the NPCs out of abyssal gravel and voidstone from the abyss. Then in the abyss, I found another abyss mini-boss, the Colossal Squid.
Hello, you've reached the house of unrecognized talent. Please start after the...
Then when I was exploring the abyss again, I actually reached the final tier this time, but it was kind of dark, so I decided to use my weapon to see if I could see, and the Colossal Squid spawned right when I shot. At the end of the abyss there was actually a chest, however I didn't have a shadow key to open it. Then after a bit more building, I finally finished my base on day 60. So after that, from day 61 to 65, I started making housing in other biomes so that I could set up the pylon system. I made one in the halo, one in the jungle, then I made one in the ocean, and finally I made one in the dungeon. For the dungeon one, I wanted to make it into an astral themed house, but it had this weird purple tint, so I decided to use a contaminator around it, and so I just gave up and made the house boring. Now that my housing was done, I wanted to fight Plantera, so the next couple of days were spent on that. Then after dying a couple of times, I turned into Al Qaeda and started expanding my arena. Then on day 67, I fought Plantera again, and I actually beat it this time. I do have to say though, I don't know if it's because I'm not used to mage class, but I've never struggled this much with Plantera before. Just like the last couple of bosses, beating Plantera gave me some new messages. Energized plant matter has formed in the underground, which meant that there was a new ore in the world called perennial ore. The desert sands shift intensely, which means that the great sand shower can now spawn, which is a mini boss in the desert. But I honestly completely forgot about that. Plantera dropped this new item called living shards, which I could use to craft this wand called the Terra Ray. And also spectral armor, because I guess Calamity changed its recipe. To craft the Terra Ray, I needed a Carnage Ray, which is made by combining a bunch of Pre Hardmode wands, including the magic missile which you find in the dungeon. So I headed to the dungeon. In the dungeon, enemies started dropping ectoplasm, which had some interesting uses in Calamity. You can combine it with the essences to craft a core of sunlight, core of chaos, and core of Ellium. And then you can combine those to craft a core of Calamity, which I could use to combine all of the shields into this ultimate shield called Asgard's Valor. I also used the core of Sunlight to upgrade my Frigid Flashbolt into the Tears of Heaven, which functioned the same way as the Frigid Flash except it fired more balls which homed in on enemies. Then I spent all of day 68 looking for a magic missile, but I couldn't find one, so I gave up on it for now. And I decided to look for the new ore, and I found out it was called Perennial Ore. I saw it before when I was in the dungeon a lot of times, but I thought it was cobalt. After I got a good amount of Perennial, I crafted this spell tomb called the Everglade Spray, which is the better version of the Golden Shower, because instead of only inflicting Ichor, the Everglade inflicts both the Ichor and Curse Flame debuffs on enemies. Then I started working on collecting materials for the Terra Ray. After breaking 8 Crimson Hearts, I finally got the Crimson Rod. Then I actually found the magic missile from the wizard, so the hour I spent in the dungeon was a waste. And then I crafted the Terra Ray, which functioned like the Valkyrie Ray, except when it hit an enemy it shot homing bolts. And the further an enemy is, the more bolts it spawns, and the more damage it does. Then I spent all of day 70 trying to fish in hell so I could get the lava shark mount and conch, but I didn't find one. So I decided to go ahead and fight the next boss, Anahita. I went to the ocean and killed and spawned Anahita. Once I took off half of her health, she actually disappeared into the ocean and it started rumbling. And out came the behemoth called Leviathan. And after I did some damage, Anahita came back out and they tag teamed me. Then after dying a couple more times, I decided to upgrade my armor into the spectral armor. And on day 71, I fought the duo again, and here's how it went. This was a pretty fun fight. It wasn't really too unfair, nor was it too hard. The only problem I had with the fight was the little shits Leviathan kept spawning, because they suddenly dash at me and always caught me off guard. Leviathan and Anahita's lore item actually made me feel a little bit sad for them. Actually, not really. Anyways, on day 73, I was heading to hell and I got a message that the armored digger has awoken. And this weird mini destroyer came out of nowhere. It was kind of cool, I guess. Then I went to the astral biome to start preparing to fight the next boss, called Astrum Aureus. I also bought this astral solution from the steampunker so I can expand the astral biome so Astrum Aureus wouldn't enrage. I didn't know at the time that it didn't enrage when you left the biome. Then I crafted the astral chunk. On my first attempt, I barely did any damage. Afterwards, I was expanding my arena when I killed this enemy called the Atlas, and I got an item called the Titan Heart, and its description said it could be used as the Astral Beacon, which was a thing on the Astral Tree. So I used the Titan Heart on it, and it spawned this boss called Astrum Deus, and I got pretty far. When I got it down to half health, it split into two different versions of itself. I was looking at the boss checklist mod to see when you're supposed to fight Astrum Deus, and apparently it's supposed to be fought after the Lunatic Cultist and before Moonlord. Then I also had the Drunken Princess finally move in, and I bought the candles from her, and they were expensive. Then after losing to Astrum Aureus again, I actually had an idea. I went to the planetoids in space and I spread the astral infections, but it wasn't big enough, so I got some dirt bombs and used those. The dirt bombs also created this very oddly familiar structure. Then after a very productive day, I lost again, so I remade my arena. I also grabbed the beacon from the astral biome. Then after some attempts at both the bosses, I started farming for money so that I could buy a whole lot of candles from the Drunken Princess. I also had a solar eclipse happen on day 78, but I wasn't feeling like doing it, so I crafted this item called the Cosmolight, which allowed me to switch the time from night to morning or from morning to night, and I used it to skip the solar eclipse. After that, I also fought Leviathan and Anahita a couple of times again so that I could get the mage weapons that they dropped. After my third attempt, I finally got the Atlantis and Anahita's Arpeggio. I also got this item called the Community from that, which gave me a bunch of buffs. And then after draining my entire college fund, I put a bunch of candles down so that they covered my entire arena. But after an awful attempt, on day 80, I tried my 7th attempt at Astrum Aureus, and here's how that went. Yeah, so I lost. I got you there, didn't I? Then I actually beat it very easily on my 9th attempt. Astrum Aureus is a boss. I didn't like it. I don't know, there just wasn't really anything special about it other than the sprite. It's a very forgettable boss in my opinion, especially when compared to others. I don't like it. In terms of drops, it dropped a mage weapon that looked cool, but the damage was awful. And it also dropped an item called the Starlight Fuel Cell, which made Adrenaline mode even stronger than it was before. Killing Astrum Aureus buffed the enemies in the astral biome, and now they could drop weapons. So I went to the astral biome and I farmed for pretty much all of day 82. And I got the Astralachnia staff, but the damage was so bad that it wasn't a viable option at all. Then I went to the jungle temple and I started making an arena to fight Golem because I wasn't sure how different the Revengeance fight would be. Then on day 84 I fought the Golem and the fight wasn't too different from vanilla. It pretty much just shot more projectiles at the player and I beat it pretty easily. Anyways, Golem's death message, "A plague has befallen the jungle," will be important in just a second. But before that, since I now had the Pigsaw, this meant that I could now finally mine the Scoria ore in the Abyss. After I had a good amount of Scoria ore, I headed back home. The first thing I did was upgrade my equipment. I turned my Celestial Emblem into the Sigil of Calamitous. I crafted the Comet Shard, which permanently upgraded my mana. Then I crafted the Hydrothermic armor set. I also crafted the Void of Extinction, a spell tomb called the Forbidden Sun, which fired a fireball that exploded on impact, some Hadal mantle wings, and some life alloy, which was made by combining perennial, cryonic, and scoria bars. Then I crafted this item called the Miracle Fruit, which permanently upgrades your health. The Miracle Fruit is supposed to be used after another permanent fruit called Blood Orange, but my stupid ass forgot to craft it. Then I forgot to record the next 2 days, but all I pretty much did was waste materials to craft another miracle fruit, which didn't work. So I crafted a blood orange, which bumped my health up an extra 25 points. Then I went to the jungle to fight Golem again so I could get its mage weapons, where I ran into the new plague themed enemies. Because after beating Golem, a plague was released in the jungle. The plague enemies dropped a material called plague cell canisters, which could be used to craft a Bombination, the spawner for the next boss. After I got the mage items from Golem, I went home and crafted the Bombination. Then while I was talking to the cyborg, I noticed that he sold an item called Martial Distress Beacon, which started the Martian Madness event, so I bought it and did the event. Then once that was over, I headed to the jungle and used the Bombination to fight the Plaguebringer Goliath, and this is where the real pain started. I thought about skipping this boss for now, so I tried an attempt at the Empress of Light. Then I crafted a death whistle and tried an attempt at the Ravager. But that didn't work, so I decided to try another tactic. Even though I knew that the Plaguebringer enrages when it's not underground, I was having a lot of trouble seeing its projectiles when everything is green, so I went to a jungle planetoid and tried an attempt at it, kind of like Astromorius. Even though the Plaguebringer was absolutely berserk in this fight, I did surprisingly good. I then fought Queen Slime so I could get her mount, since it gave me some good vertical mobility. Even though the mount helped me, I still died to the Plaguebringer again and 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 again. Until finally, on day 95, I don't even know what attempt I'm on, this happened. And yeah, I finally beat the American Queen Bee. The reason this fight was so hard was because the Plaguebringer fired so many projectiles that it's hard to keep track of them, especially in the jungle. And we have another really long lore item. The Plaguebringer dropped this weapon called the Plague Staff, which was really cool. It also dropped a material called Infected Plating, which I could use to craft the Gatling Laser, but I needed the schematic from the jungle to craft it. So on day 96, I went looking for a jungle lab. And once I finally found one, I got the schematic. Then at home I crafted the long range sensor and the advanced display. Then I decrypted the schematic and crafted the Gatling laser. And it's really good. After that, I fought the Plaguebringer again a bunch of times so I could get the Beelzebub booster wings. After I got those, I wanted to try another attempt at the Ravager before I hit 100 days. So I did just that. And here's what happened. I'm going to be honest with you guys, I was not expecting to beat this boss first try at all. I thought I was going to finish this video by constantly dying to the Ravager. In fact, it's actually the opposite. For the last 2 days, I constantly farmed the Ravager because it dropped a weapon called Vesuvius, which I really wanted. But after I beat it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 times, I didn't get it. So I tried one final attempt before day 101 started, and I didn't get it. And that's 100 days in Calamity. You only have one more Calamity boss and 3 more regular bosses left before Moonlord, including the Empress of Light. After beating Moonlord, Calamity adds a whole new section to the game for post-Moonlord, and that is where it gets really intense. But wait, before you click off the video, let me do a self-plug really quick, because this video was really hard to make. Each day in Terraria is 24 minutes long, so just recording this video took me 40 hours, and that's not including how long it took to edit it. As my first video, this was really challenging, and a like or comment would be really appreciated. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing, because honestly, the content's only gonna get better from now on, hopefully. Thank you so much for watching, and have a nice day.